Hey, Paul, and hey, Mike. Welcome to the Pope Francis generation. Mike, it's so good to have you with us. We're talking about Pope Francis at 10 years. It's like a decade with the Holy Father.
Well, thanks for having me. Yeah, I think it's appropriate for this generation. Generation is 20 years, so we're talking about half a generation, right?
Yep, yep. Paul, anything we want to let people know about before we dive into everything?
No, I'm excited to talk with Mike. I mean, I talk with Mike a lot, but this is one of the first times we've talked on a podcast.
On this podcast, yeah. Mike's one of my personal heroes, and one of the reasons why Smart Catholics and shows like this are now something I'm so excited to work on and do so. Hello and welcome, friends, to Pope Francis Generation, the show for Catholics struggling with the Church's teaching, who feel like they might not belong in the Church anymore, and who still hunger for a God of love and goodness.
Your hosts are me, Paul Fahey, a professional catechist.
And I'm Dominic, someone who needs catechesis. Together, we're taking our own look at the Catholic Church, her teachings and practices from three views that changed our world.
Those are the Kerygma, the Doctrine of Theosis, and the teachings of Pope Francis.
Together with you, we're the Pope Francis Generation. All righty, over to you, Paul.
Yeah, so we're with Mike Lewis today. He's the founding managing editor of Where Peter Is. He and Jeannie Gaffigan co-host Field Hospital, a U.S. Catholic podcast, and he resides in Maryland with his wife, Stephanie, and their 4 kids. Mike, thanks for coming on.
Thanks for having me. I had to wait until season 2 for my invite, Paul. What's that?
Season 3, Mike.
Season 3? Oh my goodness. I can't even keep track anymore.
Okay, but as we're talking, I remember that I was on one of the first Where Peter Is podcast during the pandemic, wasn't I?
You were on the first. Actually, you were on like episode 0.1, which with Dan Amiri, and we flushed that episode never to be heard
I
again.
remember that.
And then that was, it was weird because it was the first time that I had actually like seen both of you and seen your mouths move, like in real time. Like we had talked via DM and chat and, different things like that. And I think I may have had a brief phone call with Dan prior to that, but that was like our first in-person, albeit virtual, but it was our first interaction, which was, kind of weird because like
in almost 3 years, because you and I had been talking for almost 3 years.
Yeah. Point. And so talking was sort of a leap, just like having to open my mouth to communicate to you and to Dan was kind of a weird world. But here we are in the, finally caught up to the 19th century, actually, communicating via voice. But hey, 21st century, because now we're
it's voice and video.
Voice and video. That's right. This is the future.
Yeah. So before we talk about the Pope Francis's pontificate at 10, you almost died last weekend, and I think we should talk about that.
Yeah, probably not our originally planned topic, because I certainly wasn't planning on talking about any of that until until it happened. Basically, so went to bed Saturday night, tossed and turned a little bit around 1 a.m., so early Sunday morning, February 26th, I guess. Got up to go to the bathroom, washed my hands, went back to bed, laid down, and all of a sudden I felt my right ear started to itch. And, I thought, earwax or something like that. And then all of a sudden it got really intense within a few seconds. And then my left ear started to itch. And then the next thing I knew, my forehead was itching and I could feel like my jaw was tensing up. And then I went and looked in the mirror and I had these red splotches all over my chin and around, on my cheeks. And, started to think, I guess I'm having a reaction to something, and this really, really burns. And so I woke up my wife, I turned on the light, and I said, Stephanie, does my face look different to you? And she said, you look the same to me. And so, I think pretty soon after that, she said, I did turn a little bit red, but I'm like, I think we need to go to the emergency room. And yeah, so within 10 minutes, there's a brand new hospital about a mile from my house. But, within a few minutes, I had my shoes and my jacket on, and, she got the car keys and drove me over to the hospital, and got to the ER, and, she had the insurance card and my wallet and all that kind of stuff. And so she parked on the far end of the parking lot, and then she starts like booking it across the parking lot as fast as she could to get in the front door of the emergency room. And I was trying to keep up with her, but after about, 15 or 20 steps, I was like, I can't, I can't run like that. So she came back and held my hand and walked me back in there. And I go in and I tell the people at the front desk that, I can't breathe. Or, I'm struggling to breathe. My whole upper body is itchy and burny, and I must have looked like I was in a lot of distress. So they brought me back and, into the ER right away. And the tech started to do an EKG on me. I guess, big fat guy comes into the emergency room saying he's in distress. And so first thing they think is heart attack. And, and then after they lay me down, they do the EKG really quick. And he tells me, in this little room, he says, can you sit in that chair over there? And somewhere in between the table and the chair, I basically slumped to the floor. And after that, things kind of went in and out. I remember at one point I asked, like, where am I? At another point, and he said, you're in the hospital. And then at another point, I said, I'm going to die. And I heard another nurse or a nurse down the hall saying, this man just said he's going to die. And next thing I know, they're kind of like lifting me up. They put me on a gurney or stretcher, and they push me into a little room. I've got people, sticking needles into my arms. They're putting oxygen in my nose. They're saying, his blood pressure is down to 70 over something. I can hear the nurse to my right saying he's fading. Like I could hear that like 3 or 4 times. And, eventually the doctor came and they injected me with a couple of shots of epinephrine. And, within, an hour or so, I kind of came out of it. I was tired and exhausted and went right back to sleep, but that's what I would have done anyway, if this hadn't happened. So, so that was, it turns out that, at the time I must have had some kind of allergic reaction. That I'm learning new words like anaphylactic shock and anaphylaxis, and that's what they attributed it to. And afterwards, they came and told me, it was really close. And, I heard, when I heard them say he's fading, when I heard that, actually that one nurse, she said it maybe 3 times. He's fading, he's fading, he's fading, he's fading. Like I heard it 6 times total. Like, at a certain point I was like, wait a minute, this really could be it. Like I was conscious enough to realize that. And, afterwards it's funny because one of the nurse who had said, this man is going to die, or says he's going to die, she stopped by my room the next morning. I guess it was early in the shift when I arrived. And so I think she was headed home, and, she's like, well, I'm glad you're doing okay. And she's like, people who are about to die, that's what they say. Like, little fact, people apparently have an awareness that this is going to happen. Fortunately, they saved my life. And everybody at the staff was in the staff, and, I am eternally grateful to them. It's not one of the things that you expect when you crawl into bed, that you're gonna, without any prompting, without any foreknowledge of that tonight's going to be different than last night, to, come that close, I guess, to death. Like if the hospital was a 10-minute further drive away, or if my wife had insisted that I still looked exactly the same after, after further reflection. So yeah, it's one of those things where it's, so we're recording this on Thursday. And so this happened 5 days ago. and I still don't think I've totally processed what was, what was happening or the impact of it, or, yeah. So, now I'm fine. I was tired for a couple of days. My brother, who's a priest, stopped by. He anointed me on Sunday afternoon. So I don't know. I'm a member of I tweeted that I'm a member of the Six Sacraments Club. So that's, first time being anointed. And yeah, so I'm grateful to be here. Would have been a much more boring episode, I think, if you've been interviewing, an empty space right here. But
Did you end up ever figuring out what it was that triggered the anaphylaxis?
well, they referred me to an allergist, and I actually went this morning. And so they did a panel for all of the foods. They call it a panel, but they prick your back with, I guess it was 4 different panels of different types of foods, and they all came back negative. So
How strange.
yeah. And so I have to go back next week for environmental things. And they said that those typically don't cause anaphylaxis. And, they said it could have been, if it was a bug bite, that's possible. And I said, well, could you test for bug bites? And she's like, well, do you remember getting bitten? And I said, no. So, I don't know. It's, it was late February. There aren't a ton of bugs around. So, I guess if I see a bug flying around my house, I can, see what it is. But
so how do you not die from this in the future?
so I have to carry around 2 EpiPens with me for the rest of my life. And I guess, one of the things that, I tested. So here's one of my EpiPens. Basically, if I start feeling the same symptoms, and they are fairly unmistakable, I jab myself with 1 or 2 of those and call 911 and hope for the best. But it's interesting because it is well known. Like a friend of mine was telling me how a very popular teacher at his high school died of a bee sting. No known bee sting allergy, and it just, he gets stung and goes into anaphylactic shock, and didn't get the help he needed in time.
Wow.
So I'm grateful that my wife was there, and I'm grateful that it's funny because in the past, I don't know, you guys have wives and kids and families, and you're always weighing, like, should we go to the ER or not? How high?
Always. That happens
Yeah.
way too often.
Yeah, it's like 103.9. They let me call the nurse, and then at the pediatricians, and they don't give you well, should I go or not? Well, it's really up to you. For some reason, there wasn't really any question of whether or not we were going to the hospital. The question was whether we thought it was going to be quicker to call an ambulance or to just drive directly there. So I guess there was enough presence of mind, or I had enough of a sense that, this was really serious. And, my kids were still asleep in bed. We just, picked up and my oldest is technically old enough to babysit, so it wasn't, don't call Child Protective Services, but but we yeah, that it was to realize that it came that close, within 10 or 15 minutes there, I would have been not.
Wow,
here.
that's incredible.
So yeah, and I think the odd thing was the thing that I'm really trying to process now is the thought process, or, there was a point in my mind where I comprehended, like, wow, this could be it.
Wow.
And I'm still
Because
trying
you're conscious as they're saying he's fading.
Oh yeah, I'm conscious. I can hear that. And I know I'm kind of like going in and out. Like, I know it's like, I hear that, and then it's like, I'm, there's a blank, and then I'm, things are slightly different. Like, I know I just missed a period of time, and I knew that I had limited, ability to move or talk or anything. And it's interesting because I'm surprised maybe that I didn't panic as much as most people might, or I just sort of was like, well, this could be it, and tried to say my prayers, tried to, basically said, God, forgive me for my sins, and thought about my family, and, asked God to watch after them. And if this really was it, I think deep down, and that's the thing. It's like, did I really think I was going to die, consciously, actively? Like, I think when I said it, I wasn't fully with it. And that was before I was in this back room. But when I had a sense that they were gonna get me through it, that the doctors and nurses were gonna pull me through it. But it was, it is, in retrospect, it's sort of surreal, because I know that, because if things had gone differently, like, those would have been my last conscious moments. And it's, I wonder, like, there was no, we're all three of us are creatives to a certain extent, or have these dreams of, apostolates, or, achievements in that area. And I, it's funny, because I think, I did think about that a little bit, like, what's left incomplete, what I didn't achieve that maybe I wanted to achieve. But I thought to myself, briefly, that, if this is my life's work, it's God's will, and if this means I'm done, it means I'm done. So
That's wild. But you're fine now? Like,
yeah, that's the thing. I'm allergic to something unknown, maybe. Or sometimes, I guess they say sometimes they can't find a cause of it. One of the nurses, when I was in the hospital, was talking about how her son has an EpiPen, and he's had one for 17 years or something like that, and he's never used it. And I don't know what she said he was. I think maybe he's allergic to nuts or something. So he knows what the cause is, and he's avoided it successfully, and he's never used it. My hope is, that for the next however long God gives me to live, I can, I'll carry these two stupid things around with me everywhere I go, and never have to use them. But, make sure that my kids know, where I keep them at night, make sure that they have a general idea of how to use it. And, and that's about it. That's, in terms of change of lifestyle, there's going to be a blood test, I guess, basically, next week. I get tested for environmental factors, and after that test, they say they'll do blood work. And if they confirm the negative findings for the food allergies, then I'll, pistachios is like the one thing I had the day before that's a really, really known allergen. And so I'm going to avoid pistachios until I'm 100% sure that it's not pistachios. But then I'm going to go get some gelato, I think, the day. It's my favorite flavor. It's funny because it's like, one of the things that I was talking about, before this morning's appointment was like, well, would I rather be allergic to peanuts or pistachios? And the thing is, peanuts are in everything. So there's like that, like, stealth fear aspect to it. But it's like, I really, really like pistachios, though. So it's like, it's a difficult trade, but yeah, so we'll see. But maybe I can have both, and
and not die.
And not die. That seems to be the thing. And I don't know if there's a likelihood for unexplained, anaphylactic. I'm still learning that word. It was not in my vocabulary until less than a week ago. I don't know if people who have unexplained episodes like I did, if they're prone to reoccurrence. It just seems like a really weird. It's just a freak thing.
Another consideration could be if it was pistachios, or where food is sourced, and if it's treated with, or contaminants or something like that, or pesticides or something remained or got through the process. So
Maybe I
That's
should throw
another.
that bag of pistachios away. Yeah, good idea, Dominic. See, this is why you have Dominic. It's the show would be so like uninformed, I think, if it was just Paul. No offense to Paul. I mean, Paul's a great guy. I've known Paul for a long time. Paul is Paul, but
Well, I think that's a great segue. You've known Paul for ages. It's been 10
Yeah.
years. I remember 2 years ago, we hosted the Pope Francis Summit. I remember watching that thinking, gosh, I wish you guys could do this every quarter because the Holy Father doesn't quit getting up to things. And so whether this is a retrospect or just a catching up or, let's talk about that. Pope Francis at 10 years. Is he going away? Is he going strong?
how did we get here? 10 years. I mean,
Yeah,
it's
he's
amazing.
been Pope longer than Benedict was Pope. But I felt like Benedict was Pope forever. Those are just my formative years.
it might have been your formative years, but I think there was a lot of heavy reading that went on. I mean, I think that's kind of what people did with Pope. Like, I'm trying to like, the thing is, our experience as Catholics has been so, it's just different between the two papacies. I mean, I think there are a lot of Catholics who their approach to the faith, and it's probably healthier. Go to mass, say your prayers, eat your vegetables, be nice to one another.
Don't read the whispers in the Logia, right?
Well, I don't know that they post anymore on that website, but yeah, well, that was the other thing. It was like, back in the day, it was, whispers in the Logia, and the cafeteria is closed, and the Amy Wellborn blog, and now it's like you got YouTubers, and you got like, trad bros, and you've got, I don't know, you got people who got kicked off YouTube, so they got to go on Rumble and talk about conspiracy theories. And people have changed allegiances. People have, people who were once like, ardent papal defenders are now like, I don't know, wearing tinfoil hats and, ranting and raving about infiltration in the Vatican. It's an amazing, I hope that the perspective that we cover the church from and the papacy from is not a universal experience in the U.S. church, but what I do sense is that among Catholics who in the U.S. who give orthodoxy and following the church pride of place, and who try to be informed of occurrences in the church. I think a lot of those Catholics, and this is why we started Where Peter Is. I mean, it was just seeing them follow this negative attitude towards the Pope, following this narrative that the Pope Francis is somehow trying to destroy the church, dragging it away from, he's a heretic or an idolater, or, anti-Pope. Some of the things that people have been saying, and it's like, how did we get here? And that's something that I've been trying to think about.
It's been wild over the past 10 years thinking about the people I used to read and the people I used to follow in the church, and how many like authors I metaphorically have taken off my bookshelf because, some of it due to the clerical sex abuse scandal, but a lot of it because I'm like, I can't follow these guys because where they're going is not in union with the church. Where they're going is someplace else. And these are people who I saw as, they were the formative voices for me for many years.
Oh yeah. We talked about this with Sam Rocha way back when on a podcast.
The other podcast we were on.
Yeah. And how I said one of Sam's, a blog post he wrote with Patheos, like, I don't, maybe 6-7 years ago now, was one of the main factors in inspiring Where Peter Is. It was an open letter to his spiritual elders, I believe is what it was called.
Yeah.
And
it's a really excellent piece.
He's a Steubenville graduate. Learned a lot about his faith there. He was a philosophy. Now he's a philosophy professor. very interested in social justice, very, deeply inspired by Benedict and John Paul. But he noticed this hypocrisy. I don't know what the word is. It's a double standard. It's, the Catholics that really stood out as orthodox and faith-filled and rock solid. And then all of a sudden a pope comes along that doesn't exactly line up with the ideology or the picture of the church that they've developed in their own heads, or that they've subscribed to. Shoot, Pope Francis was a challenge. To me, it was just sort of like, I looked at it and I thought to myself, okay, so I've got some of my friends here who are panicking that Pope Francis is going to destroy the church or something like that. I've got this Catholic tradition that says that the Pope is the guarantor of orthodoxy, that, learning about the schisms throughout history, like, where do you go when there's a division in the church? And the answer is always stick with the Pope.
Always. It's always stay with
Peter.
Always
been stick with the Pope. Now, of course, as those of us on social media who make that point know, they'll say, well, what about Honorius? What about Vigilius? What about, and they'll name these obscure, popes from 1,000 years ago who supposedly did something, but it's like the level of antipathy and contempt from ordinary Catholics who are presenting themselves as standard bearers for Catholic truth and orthodoxy, to see them stand up and say the most horrible things about the Pope. And granted, my tone isn't always great. I get angry. I'm human. I'm sorry. Somebody will say the most horrible, horrible things about the Pope, and I'll snap back with something that's possibly not the most charitable thing. And then all of a sudden, somebody who wasn't involved in the conversation will swoop in and chastise me for my tone towards that person and ignore what that person just said about the Pope.
Yeah.
These are the types of things. Go ahead.
It's a weird thing where, and a lot of these folks, like the folks have taken, their books off my bookshelf, where they spoke, they had nothing but praise and respect for John Paul II and Benedict. I think it was just on Twitter a day or two ago. I think it was Tony Annette who was retweeting something. I forget. There was a thread, and he kind of jumped in the middle of it. But someone was saying, like, man, it's it's crazy how the pro Francis people now were the ones who were so critical of Benedict and John Paul. And he was commenting, and he's like, I don't think that's the case. And I jumped in. I'm like, no, I don't think that's the case at all.
I jumped in too. We're talking about social media. Hi, Dominic. It's good that you're staying off Twitter right now. It's better for your health, believe me.
But the only reason I'm on Twitter is to see what you guys are posting, and then I get off again because
the people I know, the group at Where Peter Is that are supportive of Pope Francis would describe themselves as like spiritual children of Benedict or John Paul.
Oh yeah.
Not just like tolerating his teaching and being respectful, but like loving his teaching and seeing him as a real spiritual father. That's why it's so weird to see people who we thought were along with us, like, yeah, we should like love and respect the Pope, and then who like went off and now say some of the most truly bizarre and hateful things about the Pope.
Well, and that's something I really noticed very early on in this resistance. Now I subscribe to the argument that the moment where things really went off the rails, or the breaking point, was the publication of the Dubia by those four cardinals. Now, I know if Rachel and Mary was here, she would tell me to stop talking about the Dubia and to change the subject. But I've got you two guys right here. Dominic says I'm his hero, so he has to defer to me.
Yeah, rituals on last week, so you can say whatever you want.
Okay, but no, but I think after that, I think it gave Catholics license to beat up on the Pope, like beat up on him. Philip Lawler writing "This Disastrous Papacy." That was one of the first. Just
It,
I hate the Pope screeds. Now,
it
no,
was
we love the Pope and we pray for him every day, and but what they mean by love is we're supposed to love everybody. So
yeah,
and
tolerant,
and I
very
pray for him every day, that because I go to daily mass and his name is mentioned, or I pray for him to convert to my ideology.
Yeah.
Um,
It was after the Dubia that we got the fraternal correction that straight up called the Pope a heretic.
oh yeah, yeah. And it just gets ignored, and then you hear people say these things about where Peter is worshiping the Pope, clearly having never read anything that we've published, because I don't know anyone who worships. Well, I know one person who worships the Pope, but he is not a Where Peter Is. He used to be a Where Peter Is commenter. He's not a Where Peter Is contributor. And if you're on Twitter, you're familiar with his work. Or maybe you're not, and consider yourself lucky. But yeah, it was this. But I'll tell you what it felt like after that. It was sort of one person peeled off after another, and there were prominent bishops and theologians peeling off too. Like this became like and it was sad. It wasn't like I wanted to like own the trads or anything like that, but to see these names come off the shelf, and it was like waking up. So I watch a lot of streaming television. Those of us who work from home and endured COVID know about this, but I don't know. Some people do true crime and home improvement. I do a lot of like post-apocalyptic TV series. I don't know. They just where there's could be zombies, it could be aliens, it could be a lot of times it's a plague or something.
Yeah, it's always a virus.
Yeah, it's some kind. Well, aliens aren't always a virus, but yeah, and it's like, but there's always that first night, right, where the outbreak happens. I'm thinking in particular, there's this one. It was a British one called Survivors, I think was what it was called, but it was an outbreak, and basically 99% of the world's population died, and there were people who had natural immunity to it. And so it's like they'll wake up and their whole family's dead, and they'll go outside and wander around and look around. And there are other survivors out there who are still alive. And to me, when after the Dubia, it was like I woke up one morning and all of my Catholic friends hate the Pope.
Yeah.
I mean, that's honestly what it felt like. And it is tragic. And like I said, they would never use the word hate. There are word games that people play like, well, I like to interpret him in line with tradition, but I'm also going to criticize, and by in line with tradition is I'm going to twist what he says so that it fits into my paradigm.
To my understanding of
tradition. And they will also bash, everyone that he's appointed, everyone who defends him, everyone who writes favorably about him, everybody who offers an accurate interpretation of his teaching. It's very disingenuous. And actually that's one of the things that really, really drives me up a wall, because I'm very attuned to it. And I know, I know what you're up to, and they'll deny it to the hilt. But I think it's funny because it's also sort of how Where Peter Is, how our little group developed, I want to say, because it was Facebook, and it would be like some well-known apologist would, post some article from the Register or LifeSite News or something about Pope Francis saying some, Pope Francis calls devout priests rigid, or something like that. And there would be 300 comments under this, and 285 of them would be negative and would be attacking the Pope. And then I'd see like these little threads of people, sticking up for the Pope and making these really well-reasoned arguments, but they're being ganged up upon. And those names it was Brian Killian. It was, it was Pedro Gabriel. it was Claire Navarro, now Pedro's wife, Claire Dominguez. And I would see these people, sort of populating these little corners of these hostile spaces, frankly. And one of the things I tried to do was network people together, like who's actually, who actually supports Pope Francis, who, where can we actually talk about these issues the way that they're supposed to be discussed?
There was a secret Facebook group you made because you invited me to it at some point.
Shh, don't tell Dominic. I don't think he's in it.
Wait, what?
No, I mean, that was part of it. Eventually my energies got redirected towards the website, but it was, Stephen Walford on, Father Paul Keller. Like, there were people out there who were actively trying to respond to this just storm of, I mean, I don't know what to say, what it was, other than some kind of possession that came over the church, some kind of force that seemed unstoppable. Like, you could lay out the arguments, you could lay it out clearly, and they just come back, and the critics would just come back at you with the same talking points, or they didn't want to look at what you said. Like, I know that Michael Lofton recently did a video with a Eastern Rite deacon about the Pachamama, so-called Pachamama conflict. And it was funny because I had never heard of this deacon before. And he's saying, like, I've been telling people these things for 2 years and nobody would listen to me. Like, they just rejected my arguments out of hand. They, it's like I was able to lay the whole thing out for them, and they just have no time for it. And I know that we spent 2 months of our lives, deeply embedded in this.
And Pedro did a ton of work.
Oh yeah.
Translating,
all the work is
getting
done,
primary sources.
All the work is there. Pedro he bought a bunch of books about, like, the Franciscans evangelizing the Amazon region 400 years ago. And, all this scholarly work trying to educate people. And there's just this wall of resistance that, it's like, unless they are open to letting the scales fall from their eyes, they just don't. And the funny thing is, Michael got all these comments on that video that were basically like, well, if someone had said this in the first place, then there wouldn't have been this problem. And I'm like, people were saying these things, and they were inventing conflict. It's like, okay, well, the Vatican spokesman said this, but the representative from the indigenous said that, and Father Mitch and they made these jumbles of facts with no cohesion, and people bought that, like, package of garbage that was being fed to them from the media, and not stepping back and thinking about what may have realistically been going on in that ritual.
Here's something I found over the past several years, and I think a great example of this was when a few weeks ago the Pope gave an interview for the Associated Press, and in that he talks about the problem of criminalizing homosexuality in different countries around the world. And he says something like, homosexuality is not a crime, it's a sin, but it's not a crime. And then so there were headlines like on NPR, like, Pope says homosexuality is a sin. And that's not what the Catechism says. I mean, I heard him and I'm like, I know what he means, but the guys at NPR don't know what that means. So Father James Martin writes the Pope a letter asking him to clarify, and the next day the Pope writes back, and I forget the exact wording, but it's essentially like, I meant what the Catechism says, and this is what the Catechism says, right? And it just reaffirmed to me that the Pope just presumes that the Catholics listening to him know what the Catechism says, and know that the Pope knows what the Catechism says. And if you just presume that, then 99% of the confusion about his teaching is gone. Or if you just presume that the Pope isn't going to bring in pagan worship into the Vatican, that these are indigenous Catholics who are bringing their Catholic devotions to the Vatican. You give that basic level
Well,
of
they were
presumption of
unable to,
goodness.
like people who live in the Amazon, who live in these remote tribes, who I seriously doubt they have broadband internet to read traditionalist blogs about what Catholic churches are supposed to look like, let alone prior to their visit to Rome, who knows how many times they've gone into a Catholic church. And and they're trying to say that these people are pagans. They're worshiping God in the way that they know how, in the way that they've been taught by the missionaries, something that they have reserved without frequenting the sacraments, despite the influence of the outside factors, evangelicals, Pentecostals that come in or in the past, powerful land-owning Catholic authorities who would drive them from. I mean, I can't speak to all the issues right now, but it's just sort of like, why can't you give these guests of the Holy Father the benefit of the doubt?
It's just the minimum benefit of the doubt.
Oh yeah, but and the thing is, they don't even care. And this is actually this is something I want to say clearly on this podcast, because I want to say it offends me more than anything you could say about me or where Peter is, or even about Pope Francis. But there are traditionalists who call our website Where Pacha Is, okay? Because they think Pachamama is this big joke and it's paganism and all this stuff. That name is so incredibly racist and insulting to those indigenous brothers and sisters in Christ. Sorry to get onto my soapbox, but there are, and I want to call out names: Peter Kwasniewski and Gregory DePippo. You are racists. Sorry. Okay, that was my. But I mean, I just don't understand. To score points against a pope you hate, you have to denigrate a people that's oppressed, a people that is poor, a people that does not have the creature comforts and the pontifical high masses that you think you deserve.
Yeah, and I think that they're
I
really
got angry there. I'm sorry. Thought it was going to be more of a brooding and introspective.
And also, it's also just factually untrue. Like
It
Pachamama
is. I mean,
doesn't have any actual connection to those people. And
oh yeah, and that's what I say. If you want to tell lies about me, if you want to tell lies about Paul, please be my guest. If you want to tell lies about the Pope, go ahead. But don't tell lies about those people, and don't tell racist lies about your brothers and sisters in Christ. Actually, they're not your brothers and sisters in Christ, because you are not of Christ when you say that. They are with Christ, not you. Okay. Sorry. Have you had an angry guest before on
No.
Pope Francis generation? Because
No.
honestly, that is a hill that I will die on.
Yeah.
The way
it makes me think of the scandalizing the little children.
Oh yeah.
And in terms of development of the faith and first world versus third world, all the materialism that we enjoy in America versus what they're trying to eke out in I have no idea what life is like in the Amazonian basin and whatever.
And the thing is, the way that they acted about, the idea, okay, we can talk about celibacy. We can talk about ordaining married men. We can talk about, those are issues that are serious. They're of great consequence. I understand it's not something that we can really solve in the context of a synod. But for people to rebel so strongly against, doctrinally sound ways that the church can help provide sacraments to these people who live in remote regions and preserve the faith. Mm-hmm. And then 3 or 4 months later, for them to whine like babies that their masses were, that they had to stay home and live stream a mass because there was a global pandemic going on. What hypocrites. I mean, these are crazy people. Sorry. I don't know. You don't edit these, do you? All right. Well, they are. I mean, it's insanity. And it's astounding that we are talking about stuff like this 10 years into the papacy of Pope Francis, a pope whose teaching and witness and example is, it was eye-opening to me. I mean, I was, not to say I don't love John Paul II and Pope Benedict, like I do, and I'm not even like compartmentalizing it like yeah. No, they played a huge formative role in my development, in my understanding of the faith, in my theology. But Pope Francis was the challenge. Like he was the one who opened my eyes to wait. The Catholic Church isn't supposed to be comfortable. It's not supposed to be a club of like-minded friends. You know, I mean, I think like people talk about the Latin Mass communities, for example, and they're, you know, it's like if your parish is, I mean, young families are wonderful and beautiful. I have a young family. You guys have young families. You know, the fact that people can go to church and socialize with people that are of like backgrounds and like minds, that they can develop these, you know, this community, like that's wonderful. That's great. But that's not the goal of the church. Like, yeah, you have your peers. That's just natural. That's human sociology. But it's like, you know, they show these polls of you know, I mean, the statistic, you know, the methodology is terrible, but they show, oh, look, the people who go to Latin Mass, you know, 99% of them believe in the real presence. 99% of them think you should go to Mass every week. 99% of them think you should go to hell, if yada, yada, yada. And they present this as if it's a good thing. Where are your seekers? Where are your doubters? Where are the people who are struggling with their faith? Where are the people who have come to this parish in a time of crisis and don't know what to believe, don't know what they think about God, don't know what they think about Jesus? You know, where are these people whose hearts have been broken by, you know, by something a priest did in their life and has caused them to doubt the sacrament of holy orders? You know, where are the people who have, you know, whose relative, you know, whose gay relative just committed suicide, you know, and whose, you know, moral, you know, their moral ideas that are, you know, thrown into crisis. I don't see crisis when I see 99% of people believing the exact same thing.
All this criticism of Pope Francis has created a weird environment, and I'm not sure if I've articulated this before, but it's this. There's a culture, or there's like an atmosphere of suspicion on everything he says and does,
and dread of everything he's going to say and do.
Yeah. This like anticipatory suspicion and criticism. And my reaction to that is to say then, well, I will never say anything remotely critical of Pope Francis because I don't want to contribute to that. And I don't. But I think that it's, I mean, I think, meaningful criticisms of John Paul II. I think I have meaningful criticisms of Pope Benedict. They're nuanced. They're respectful. I'm just a lay guy. It's not like I have a soapbox. I mean, that I'm like, you know, openly like criticizing these popes. But likewise, I have criticisms of Francis, specifically of some of the decisions he's made with clerical sexual abuse. Even recently with the one Jesuit artist priest,
Rupnik.
Yeah, like just fire the guy
He is. I mean, that's, and the thing is, it's like there are these processes and they're more complex. But it's like we're always.
Yeah, but I don't want to. But I don't care about the process.
I know, I understand that, but I'm saying it's like one of those things where it's like these things. If we were living in a normal ecosystem, these things would be, you know, dealt with through the proper channels. And I mean, it's like, you know, Cardinal McCarrick, former Cardinal McCarrick, he was retired, you know, and it's like, how is he still in the College of Cardinals? You know, and that was like the rant for like a month and a half until they finally took him away from the College of Cardinals. And then it became, why isn't he laicized? And that was sort of like the, you know, the mantra. And it's like, it's just sort of like, we'll never be satisfied. We need to, and okay, I get it.
Yeah,
it wasn't all, it's not all handled right. But I think the thing is, we don't have a clear understanding of how certain things are handled.
I think though, and my point being here is, I think that there are legitimate criticisms we can have of this process of like, why isn't this being handled better, quicker, more effectively? And I think likewise, another criticism with like, I mean, personally, I have mixed feelings with the Pope's motu proprio on the Latin Mass Traditionis Custodes. Theologically, I agree with it, but I think that there could have been more accompaniment. I think there's like the loud Taylor Marshalls, the priests with their own blogs, who represent. I mean, there's a lot of like good people who just prefer the Latin Mass, who have no animus towards the Pope or animus towards Vatican II. And there wasn't much accompaniment or really any accompaniment for them. So I think that there's areas where like we can have. I wish we could have constructive conversations, but the environment makes it so those constructive conversations are difficult to impossible to have.
I don't think there's any way. I mean, the thing is, it's like on the anti-Francis side right now with regard to the Latin Mass, you have people who are adamantly and ardently opposing it, decrying it, saying it's evil, saying it's awful,
saying it's heretical, saying it goes against canon law,
saying that it's the old rite is the only true Roman rite and the new rite is some corrupt something or other. You got them. And then you have this class of, I mean, and I just, I wrote a couple of articles criticizing them recently where they're paying maybe lip service to the authority. They're paying lip service to the fact that that this decision does exist, but they are working to undermine it. Clearly, nobody doubts that they're undermining it. They know they're undermining it, but they will deny anytime you try to criticize or anytime you try to call them out on it. And so it's really hard to get the real teaching in there, to get the real accompaniment in there. I mean, there's an entire narrative about the liturgical reforms and why they were done in the 1960s and 70s. And 99% of the church went along with them, embraced them. Now, it's funny because, I mean, both Dominic and I could probably say, like, in our own family lineage, these changes were not received well. But as I hear more and more from, boomer Catholics, it's like, I remember Deacon Bill Deitwig wrote a piece right after right after Traditionis Custodes came out on Where Peter Is. And he was an altar boy and went to junior seminary, like in the early, like basically the 10 years of the 1960s, like he was in seminary, like at low levels. He never, he wasn't ordained a priest. Later on, he went and became a deacon. But he remembers like one of the priests that taught him, and I mean, people weren't calling these people heretics or anything. He said he just, he didn't think he'd live to see the day where he'd be able to turn to his congregation and say, "The Lord be with you." He was really old. And then I think in one of the transitional masses in the mid 60s, like he finally did that and there were tears streaming from his eyes. The idea of being able to hear what the priest is saying and understand was so novel. Now I understand that the devotees today, they have their hand missals, they have their catechesis, they understand what's going on. But like for the average Catholic, these were radical changes. Like I'm actually part of the Mass, and they're not, and it's not that every reform was great. It's like, okay, well, maybe these 3 words in this one collect shouldn't have been revised this way, or this is a, misconstrual of that, or maybe getting rid of the ember days, or, I mean, maybe those things are bad, but it's like, fundamentally though, the core of the liturgical change, and I believe this strongly, is what Vatican II intended.
Well, I mean, they make that clear, but Paul VI made that clear.
Paul VI made that clear
in his implementation of the new liturgy.
But they're pushing a totally different narrative. I mean, if you ever watch the Mass of the Ages movies, they make it clear.
I'm familiar enough.
But basically there's a whole other narrative that it was hijacked by a Freemason archbishop, and he Protestantized the entire the
Okay.
entire mass, and
Yeah.
Paul VI was senile and he didn't know what he was signing,
So
or
there's
he
this
was
weird
evil.
so there's this weird thing. I've heard this narrative. So for years growing up, because as a young adult and whatever, like very conservative, very much in like Catholic apologetics.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, I've been to multiple talks, like live talks in person with Janet Smith, right? So, like I've heard the narrative about Humani Vitae my whole adult life that um the anti-Humani Vitae narrative of, well, the majority of his advisory committee said the church's teaching should change about contraception, and
Yeah.
Paul VI made a mistake
Mm-hmm.
because he didn't follow his advisors when he issued Humani Vitae. And then now I'm hearing the exact same narrative about the liturgy from traditionalists who are like, well, see, there's what the council actually intended, and then there was this like concilium or whatever, and like we know Paul VI officially promulgated and taught the new liturgy, but it's not really in the spirit of the council, right?
Well, they wouldn't use the word spirit.
Well, but
It's in the spirit, quote unquote, spirit in scare quotes,
yeah,
as opposed to the actual council.
Paul VI taught it like it's his papal magisterium on both counts.
Yeah.
But there's this idea of like, well, because how the sausage was made was really messy, we can dismiss that fact that he actually taught it and that it's actually authoritative.
Well, and they focus on two lines from Sacrosanctum Concilium. It's, Latin must be preserved and Gregorian chant must have pride of place.
Yeah.
And I mean, and it's funny because speaking of Michigan theologians, the Mary Healy series in
Mary Healy and Wynandy
and Cavadini
in Notre Dame. Yeah.
Notre Dame. They actually explained, and I looked up the documents afterwards, the bishops' conferences around the world. First of all, Sacrosanctum Concilium allowed them to petition for greater use of the vernacular, or even entirely in the vernacular. But so many bishops requested it that Pope Paul was like, well, this seems to be a fruit of the council. Everybody's asking for it. So let's, and then the other thing, I wrote an article about Gregorian chant because I wanted to sort of investigate this for myself. And I discovered this when I was reading John O'Malley's book on Vatican I, the great Jesuit historian. But he was talking about how the liturgical movement that started in the late 19th century was like Gregorian chant had died. You could not find Gregorian chant in Rome. There were some Benedictine monasteries that were trying to keep it alive, and but it was an ancient art form that is a treasure of the church. It's a great tradition. And since the late 19th century, since the letter that Pius X wrote in 1903.
What's that one?
Dominic knows the name of it.
Something solicitudinous or something
like that. He said, it was the first thing that ever said full and active participation, but it also called for a revival of Gregorian chant.
It was about sacred music.
Yeah, and popes have been calling for revivals of Gregorian chant ever since then. Like, it was aspirational. When it says Gregorian chant needs to have pride of place, that's because nobody was singing it. I mean, there were a few people, but like my mom, who grew up in the 1950s in suburban Maryland, was listening to treacle tunes, Marian, warbly Marian hymns. And, I mean, it wasn't like you could walk in and hear this beautiful scola, at every corner mass. It was like, hey guys, remember that Gregorian chant? Let's keep working at that. It wasn't like they stripped it away from anybody. I mean, maybe they did from some places and replaced them with guitar masses. And that's not to downplay abuses and the crazy 70s, but that's not what we're talking about now. Yeah. But that narrative is not going to get through. And
so we're coming up on an hour, so we have to wrap up. Sure. And we didn't even have an outline for this. We've been all over the place.
It was an outline. We just didn't follow it. That's
true. So we like ending the show with something concrete. Not that what we've been saying hasn't been concrete, but there's a narrative that kind of presents two extremes and on papal authority, and one is that everything the Pope says is infallible, and the other is that we can freely ignore whatever the Pope says, or the Pope can teach heresy. And these are like the two extremes, and the truth is neither of those things. What is the disposition? And I don't mean like necessarily. I mean, I talked with Dr. Fastigi a few weeks ago, and he got into like the documents and stuff. But I mean more like, what's the personal disposition? How would you articulate the personal disposition that Catholics are asked to have towards the Pope, and how do we live that out in a practical way?
One of the things that I think we have to understand is that our faith is a gift. Christianity is a received faith. Jesus Christ put Peter at the leadership, at the helm of the church. Popes aren't perfect. Popes are human. But we have been guaranteed by Christ, and we have been promised special assistance by the Holy Spirit, that the see of Peter will not fail. And I would ask those who have decided to hold the Pope in contempt, or to look at him with suspicion, to reevaluate who the Pope is in light of what the Church teaches about the Pope, and to listen to him with a degree of openness and detachment, and prayerfully receive his teaching. And if he says something that makes you pick one thing, especially if you're a huge critic, something that makes you wince and turn away and react, consider instead to reflect on it. And just think, where is he coming from? Think, is this coming from the church? Is this, or try to consider that it is coming from the church. It's coming from the Holy Father. If it's a teaching on our faith or a teaching on morals. I mean, they even say that disciplines, partake in that divine assistance as well. But try to get different perspectives on it. Try just that first thing that, something needs to break the ice. And I don't think people want to be Catholic. Good Catholics don't want to oppose the Pope. Yet I think some are so deeply buried in that they don't even know where to begin to turn around. The next thing that he does, the next thing that he says, maybe look for, don't spin it, don't twist it, but sit with it. Think about it, reflect on it, try to understand it. And maybe you will begin to see Pope Francis in a new and more healthy light.
Mike, thank you.
Thank you, Paul. Dominic, how you doing?
I'm good. Thank you, Mike. I enjoyed this. I always enjoy hearing you and all of that. So
I feel like
thanks
I went
for
in
hanging
3
out with
different
us.
directions, maybe 5, but yeah, great.
That was good. Well, let's wrap with a invite to people who are, if you're catching this on YouTube, and if you liked what Mike has been putting down, please hit that like button. It does help more people to discover this interview and other things that Mike is up to, Paul is up to, and what we're up to at Smart Catholics. If you're enjoying these conversations, hey, we'd absolutely love to meet you and hang out.
Yeah, if you like this podcast and you want to go deeper with the topics that we discuss, check out Father's Heart Academy. We're building a community for folks looking for more compelling answers to their questions about Catholic teaching. Like what Mike said, we're looking at the actual documents of Pope Francis and looking at them with honesty and clarity, and talking about them in a personal and prayerful way. So check out Father's Heart Academy.
Exactly. fathersheartacademy.com just launched. We're very, very excited to be getting this out there. And, you get the chance to meet with Paul regularly and privately within this little community. You can discuss recent podcasts on this show or current events in the church. Paul, if our friends have a question or some feedback on this podcast, where can they go?
You can go to popefrancisgeneration.com is the host site for this podcast. And then if you want to follow Mike, you can follow him at wherepeteris.com.
Yeah, check out wherepeteris.com. And if you like this podcast, popefrancisgeneration.com. And this is, this whole thing is it's kind of a love gift project collaboration between Pope Francis Generation and Smart Catholics, which is the free online community for Catholic millennials, creators, and learners who want faithful conversations like this one, unafraid of doubts and questions, and plus we're free of trolls and ads and toxicity. Join us at smartcatholics.com. Till next time, say a short prayer for yourself and for us. And remember, don't be afraid to ask questions. Doubts can be a sign that we want to know God better and more deeply. God bless you.